Hi, welcome to the Closet Philosophy Podcast. This is Janine. I'm a personal stylist.
And this is Kristen. I'm a fashion writer, and we're here to uncover the ways that your personal style is so much more than just clothes.
Whether you realize it or not, what you wear touches on science, psychology, culture, politics, and so much more. Today, we welcome to the show Véronique Hyland, Elle's magazine fashion features director and author of the book Dress Code, a collection of essays that uncovers fashion's impact on power, sexuality, and class. Dress Code was named the best book of 2022 by The New Yorker, the best nonfiction book of 2022 by Esquire, and a must-read book of 2022 by Town and Country magazine. Véronique has interviewed fashion industry icons including Donatella Versace, Marc Jacobs, and Rick Owens, and she coined the term Millennial Pink. In addition to Elle, her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, W, New York Magazine, and so many more. Véronique, welcome to Closet Philosophy.
Thank you for having me.
So, Veronique, like I was saying earlier, I just read your book pretty recently, and something that really stuck with me was your discussion of the male versus female gaze. And that I think about that a lot because as the women I'm surrounded by get older, I notice them talking a lot about not dressing for the male gaze and wanting to instead dress, specifically for themselves or for the female gaze. But in that chapter, you challenge the notion of the female gaze and whether it's actually even possible to dress just for yourself. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I wanted to write about that because I had sort of started to see the term female gaze used almost as a marketing term in a lot of cases. And it would almost be used as a way to say, well, this ad campaign doesn't objectify anyone because it was shot through the female gaze, or this designer sees things through the female gaze. And so we all kind of like have a working definition of what the male gaze is. And I think people kind of instinctually understand what it is. So I wanted to look at this idea of, is the female gaze a real thing? Is it sort of done in reaction to the male gaze? And then broader, can you ever really dress in a vacuum? Can you dress for yourself entirely? And how does that work? Can we ever really escape all of these things that we are subjected to and the expectations of other people? And I find it really interesting, like what you were saying about as people age, as women age, I think they start to question this a bit more, and they start to say, well, who am I really doing this for? But I just think that it's a little bit like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes it's used in this very trendy way, particularly when it comes to fashion, that is just getting people to buy into something else.
And
Yeah,
what do you
and I
think
think
that, sorry,
go ahead.
and
You go ahead.
what are you seeing that something else is?
I think that like all of these ideas about, I'm dressing for myself, personal style, and these conversations are ongoing and kind of cyclical because people have been having conversations about personal style. As you know, back in the like blogging days, that was a big focus. But I think there's this idea of like, oh, I don't have to care about what other people think of me or what people's reaction is to what I wear. That's sort of this like extreme level of privilege sometimes. And I think sometimes this idea of the female gaze is used to sell things in the same way that the male gaze was, but to also have this gloss of, oh, this isn't, exploiting anyone on it.
Mm. But you see that it is in a way.
I think it can be. I think
Yeah.
things are not as cut and dried.
Yeah.
And that was something that I tried to wrestle with in that chapter and didn't, I think, totally come to a conclusion, frankly. But I just think it's interesting that like people have gone in a complete 180 so that there's this idea that if a woman is being sexualized, she's being objectified, or if a woman is dressing in a certain way, then she's just catering to the male gaze and she doesn't like respect herself and all of these things. So it was sort of used as a way to elevate the choices of some people over other people's choices. And I think, this hadn't really come along in a big way when I was writing the book, but this idea of like bimbo dressing or coquette core and all of these things kind of have come along and complicated that a little bit because I think people are looking to these like traditional ideas of femininity and these traditional motifs a bit more and looking at them in a new way, which I find to be interesting. Like I did a story a couple years ago about these newer lingerie designers who were all designing. They weren't really coquette core, but they felt like less lingerie and more just like what you used to wear when you were younger, like when you'd wear in middle school.
Mm.
Rosette was one of them, Cuckoo Intimates, Rat Boy. And they all had slightly different aesthetics, but that was kind of the idea. And I got such polarized reactions to that because people were like, well, if you're a woman, why would you want to wear this? You're not a girl, blah, 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 blah. But then other people felt that there was something exciting in celebrating girlhood and being a woman who's still in touch with their girlhood. But it was definitely much more divisive than I expected something like that to be. So it's interesting to see the ways that people are still kind of divided by these things. Like you can't make the right choice in terms of how you present yourself. Someone will always be upset by it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's like kind of like how the internet is because, like this whole idea of like not dressing or like I don't care what people think. And I think about this actually quite a lot because fashion, and you actually talk about this a little bit in your book. I mean, I think it was in your first chapter, how fashion is communication. Like the way you dress communicates things about you, even if like you think that you're not, you are. And so like this whole notion of I don't care what people think kind of like dismisses like that idea that you can actually communicate quite a lot about yourself and what you value and what you stand for and also like how you value your community through the way that you dress and it's kind of like a nuance because it's not really like I'm dressing to fit in or I'm dressing to please other people, but it's more like I'm dressing to have my voice heard. I'm dressing to engage. And so
Right.
it's a little bit like a nuance that's really difficult to actually communicate in a, internet friendly soundbite.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I hear a lot from people who are, and it tends to be straight men, not always, but who are like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what people wear, and I don't care about fashion, and I don't put any thought into what I wear and all of that.
Hmm.
And I kind of want to say, well, is there a dress code at the company you work at? Can people show up wearing jean shorts? Or would that be considered, disrespectful to do in a meeting? Like all of these things that people would, of course, go, oh, yeah, well, of course, you could never do that. So it's like they do have these ideas around it. Even if you're in a very casual workplace like what we have seen in the tech world, there's still sort of hierarchies of things, or like the finance world where people are wearing these very simple looking, kind of outdoorsy, puffy vests, but they're, the Patagonia vest and they're expensive. And it
Hmm.
shows that you're on the chilly trading floor. So it shows that you're a part of the whole thing. So, yeah, even like you say, even people who claim that they're not dressing for anyone else, there's still a sense of like fitting into a workplace, a community, that you're going to be dealing with other people in your life, and people do pick things out, maybe subconsciously sometimes, to communicate that.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I always said something, I like had this retort that like, you can say that fashion doesn't matter or it doesn't matter what I wear if you've never had to if people take you seriously when you
Mhm.
speak. And
Right.
so and that's something that a lot of men, particularly straight white men, experience, and so they're not thinking of all of the privilege that they have when they speak, whereas a woman, she came in disheveled and wearing like ratty clothes, like she would not be taken seriously. So,
Right. Like, I don't think that I can think of a female equivalent of like the way Mark Zuckerberg dresses. I
mm,
think he would be the best example of someone who's like going to the stock exchange in a hoodie and shower shoes.
mhm.
Or the way Adam Sandler dresses for the red carpet. I know that's become kind of like, a little bit of an in joke, but you don't really see female movie stars doing that. They wouldn't get away with it. Everything is so much about styling, and you're wearing jewelry and hair and makeup and all of that. So it does take a certain level of privilege to be able to say, oh, I'm going to wear board shorts to the Oscars.
Yeah. Yeah. So another theme that came up a lot in the book that I noticed was this idea of effortlessness and how important it is, whether it came up with the French cool girl look, and then the it girls, and then the no makeup. It's like this idea of looking like you didn't try somehow like allows you this sense of like superiority, or there's that sense. And like even though you have been spending just as much effort as probably anyone who has like an obvious full face of makeup, it somehow elevates your status. So I'm wondering, like, what is your thought on like what is behind this appeal of erasing all the effort put into all these things that we do?
Yeah, I think it kind of allows you to fit the beauty standards while feeling superior to them, pretending you don't care about them, or at least making it seem to other people like you didn't have to put in effort. You're just like this. And
We're
I
built
think
this
that
way.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think we see that, increasingly with like younger women are getting facelifts, not just Botox and filler, but getting facelifts. That's a big thing now. People obviously, are using GLP-1 drugs and all of these things, but there's still this reluctance for people to be as open about it because they want to seem like I'm just effortlessly thin. I just have this face, so it's just like the technology has gotten to the point where people can use all of these technologies to change their appearance, but it's still kind of, I mean, you see a little bit more people talking about it, but people are kind of opening up more about getting Botox or getting filler, but you still don't really see celebrities saying, I just got a facelift, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting too, because it's like, when it came to the it girls that I talk about in one of the chapters, or even like when I'm talking about people like Brigitte Bardot and the whole like French girl beauty obsession, there's also this idea that is applied to them. They're not necessarily saying this about themselves, but just this idea that, oh, they don't even know what they're doing. They don't even know the effect they have on people. They're just natural and beautiful and kind of just like this. And they're not putting on any airs, unlike the people who are trying really hard, putting on makeup,
Mhm.
doing all of those things. And you see it applied to everyone from like Edie Sedgwick and people like that back in the day to influencers now. That all of these debates about who's natural, who got what done, this kind of fascination that everybody has. And then this idea of like, oh, these are the people that just, they don't even know, they didn't even like study how to have style. They just were born. They just
Mhm.
came out of the womb having this innate it girl style, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, it's so like as you're speaking, this really comes up to mind. Like beauty in our culture is power. And this is something that a lot of women, like I've noticed, like whenever I talk about power, a lot of women kind of pull back a little bit. Like I don't want power. Like I don't want to step into my power. Like
Hmm.
this is something that I don't want necessarily. I just want to be me. And like even though that is power, but like it reminds me of like in the 2016 election, there was this one person, I can't remember where it was, whether it was an article or some rando bro in the internet, saying you shouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton because she wants to be president.
Hmm.
And I just thought that was so interesting because people were like, yeah, like she just wants power. She just wants this. And so like this whole
Yeah.
idea of like wanting to be beautiful or wanting to have this power or wanting to be noticed, wanting to be seen is something that we are conditioned from an early age to not consciously want, even though subconsciously it's there.
Right. That's so interesting. Yeah, I think this idea of trying at all as a woman is very like loaded with a lot of associations. And even, I mean, I'm no Hillary Clinton, but I think about when I was in school and I would be sort of almost discouraged from trying too hard by some teachers. And then there would be a boy in the class that was really smart, but didn't put in that much effort or didn't work that hard, and they would treat this person like they walked on water. And this didn't happen, just once. This had
Mhm.
happened constantly.
Yeah.
But it's much easier to be seen as like a try hard and for that to be a bad thing. It's like, why would it be a bad thing that I'm applying myself to this class that you teach? But there had to be this sense of, oh, I'm just, I'm not like putting in too much effort because that would be alienating and that would mean that I somehow, yeah, I guess, want too much. But I think it really applies to things, outside of beauty and fashion too, but it just gets extended to this realm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
there's like a real like unfairness about it in my mind because you gave an example of it was an actress, I can't remember who it was, but they were the way people in the press and society talked about them was that like, oh, they're just like a born actress. They're just like born knowing how to do this, but that really ignores all the hard work that this person actually probably put into their trade and their craft. So it's kind of like it's not fair. Like, like just saying someone is naturally good at something when they actually work really hard. Like there should be, I feel in my mind there should be recognition of the hard work.
mm,
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you can see this even a little bit with Mikey Madison in Honora. I haven't seen the movie yet. It just started streaming, so I'm probably going to watch it today. But I mean, by all accounts, she's amazing in the movie, but she also worked really hard. She like learned Russian. She learned how to pole dance for one scene. She learned all of these things. But I think the way that she was being covered is like she's a zeitgeisty it girl that just somehow has this thing that everyone once and like ignored a little bit the hard work that she put into that role, although she was ultimately rewarded with the Oscar win, so that's good. But I think the actress you're talking about is Brigitte Bardot, and
Okay.
that was kind of trippy to research that part because the person who was saying that was actually Simone de Beauvoir, and she was writing in Esquire
Wow.
in the 50s, but
Wow.
she was saying, oh, she's so natural. She just is like she just looks like a girl that just walked off the street and didn't do anything to herself. And it's like now we look at like beauty tutorials and she has like hairspray and eyeliner and all of these things. But I guess compared to people at the time, this felt like a very fresh and natural, untouched look. She would walk around barefoot and stuff. But yeah, she was definitely described by everyone as like, oh, she's just like this a person that wandered onto a movie set and didn't even try and became a star, which I'm sure, is not exactly how her career went.
no, I
Yeah, that
think,
is so strange because she looks very glam, like very made up to me when I look at old pictures of her.
yeah,
I agree. I think it must be sort of lost in translation between eras because I guess you think of like more people looked like the characters on, well, not even Mad Men, because I guess that would have been later, but like looked like more 50s people that were always wearing a hat and gloves. And so,
Yeah.
in comparison to that, I guess she does sort of look, she has sort of the no makeup of that time, but it all is
Yeah.
very relative.
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that both of you touched upon this whole thing is like effortless is not necessarily like an aesthetic necessarily, but it is a reflection of skill. And
Yeah.
it's something that I see in my clients a lot of times when they come to me, they're really second guessing their outfits. And so, and I don't style people in a sense where like, oh, you should wear this and this and this. I teach them how to think about getting dressed. And so in the beginning,
Mhm.
they're like really like overworking their outfits and they're second guessing, and you can kind of see it in the way that they put together their outfits. But by the end, there's like an effortlessness about it. And so,
Hmm.
and it's like they're not overworked and they're confident in it. And it's really interesting to see because I can't really explain like what it is that happens. Like you can't just tell people, oh, just like wear less or like take this thing out or do this. It's more of
Right.
an approach and a vibe than it is about like an actual aesthetic. And so, yeah, I just think that's really interesting that you guys were talking about how it's not something that comes easy.
Yeah, and it's like anything, like a gymnast, an Olympic gymnast makes gymnastics look easy, but it's like so hard. Any athlete or anything like that, that's a good point. It's made to look easy because of the work put behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So so as we're talking about like effortless, so style icons like Jane Birkin and Chloe Sevigny are often thought of as innately stylish, but that's like it's some sort of like magical quality. But you write in Dress Code that personal style often develops as a defensive adaptation, much like an armadillo's bony scales. When I read that, it struck me as that this could be a reason why so many older women become interested in finding their personal style. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, when I was looking at some of these people who were held up as style icons, like Edie Sedgwick, like Frida Kahlo, I found that in a lot of cases they had something that they were sort of they wanted to compensate for, or they kind of used fashion as a way to channel something that was going on with them, either physically or mentally. So, like Edie Sedgwick had this very dramatic eye makeup that she wore, that there was some backstory about, covering up her tears. And then with Frida Kahlo, she, obviously wore these long and colorful skirts. And it was in part because she had been disabled in an accident and she was covering her cast. She would sort of do all these things to, she was self-conscious about that, so she would do things to just distract from that a bit in her appearance. And the more that I looked at people who had these style signatures, not all of them, but it was like, oh, they were self-conscious about something, so they either leaned into it or they were doing something to kind of, they felt counterbalance it. And that was interesting to me because you think of personal style as like again, we talked about like, oh, it's innate and you're just born knowing what to do. And there are people like that. But with these people, it was something that they developed and it almost became more like an accounting of their life story, all kind of wrapped up in what they were wearing and how they were styling themselves. Yeah. And I think it can be a defense mechanism dressing a certain way, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I was, not necessarily expecting to find that when I delved into these stories. Because the thing about also about a lot of these people is their style is covered in this pretty superficial way, and you have to really like dig into the primary sources about them to even know this because, any story about like Edie Sedgwick's makeup usually doesn't get into this or get into much about what was going on with her. And then the other thing that I noticed is a lot of people who are held up as style icons are women who either died pretty young or disappeared from the scene. And this idea of like, I mean, there are people who were older style icons like Iris Apfel that emerged, but in general, it tended to be these women who were not just young, but kind of arrested in youth, and nothing ever really changed. And we could sort of look back at them and be like, oh, those were the days back when people dressed like that. But we weren't grappling with, oh, this person is still with us and they're 70 and this is how they dress now and all of that. So I found that interesting as well, that like the personalities are kind of erased from these stories and so are often their existence. And like Chloe is an interesting example of someone who's still referred to as an it girl and has been able to really evolve. And I mean, she's always had great style, but her style has definitely changed. And she has this sort of cult of personality around how she dresses. But people accept her as an it girl years after she was called one by Jay McInerney.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if that, do you think that is a sign of changing times? hopefully, maybe. Or is she like just maybe a unique case?
I hope so. I mean, I see some other like Gen X women fitting that into that spot, but she's probably the one that's most referred to as a style icon. Alexa Chung, who is a millennial, is another one where I interviewed her recently because she did another collaboration with Madewell. She had done one like 12 years ago that was like this, big it girl and retailer collaboration. And she's someone who also is like still very much seen and referred to as an it girl, even though she obviously does all different things. I think that that window has definitely extended a bit, but I think we're not really at a place of, um, I mean, influencers mostly tend to be pretty young and kind of like it still feels like they have a little bit of a shelf life. So I think we have moved past it a bit, but not entirely.
For
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my theories about why influencers have a short shelf life, but that's for another podcast, I
It
guess.
might also be a very burnout prone profession. I would imagine it is.
Yeah, yeah. I was a fashion blogger in the 2010s and 2000s and 2010s, and I there
Yeah.
was like one day like I just dressed to, be cute and like have cute outfits and like look cute and get comments and work with brands and all of that kind of stuff. And then there was a time where I was like sitting at my keyboard and I was trying to write about an outfit and I was like, this is so dumb. Like, and I couldn't like muster up the meaning behind like the clothes. And it's
Yeah.
because it was like so focused on like the self and then now like the second time around it's really different because when you start to like look at fashion and how it exists in context of the world, it's really fascinating and there's a lot of points to it and a lot of points to explore, which you do really well in your book, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, but I think it's got to be tough to be in that position where things are built around like your appearance, your personality, all of that. I think that is actually pretty tough on people. And one of the things that I wasn't expecting for whatever reason, you write something and don't know who's going to read it. And some influencers did read the book and read the chapter about influencers and shared with me their thoughts, which were, I saw a lot of my own, you know, challenges with my career in what you were talking about. Or I ask myself these things too, even though I do this. So it was kind of interesting to hear the other side of that because obviously I'm not an influencer and I just, follow that landscape and write about it. But to feel like a lot of them are asking themselves these questions too.
Yeah. And
That is interesting. So, I was sorry. Do was there any backlash from influencers at all, or were they mostly just pretty thoughtful comments?
If there was, I didn't hear about it, but maybe there are people who feel that I didn't nail it. That's
I'm
entirely
sure they would have
possible.
let you know.
Yeah. But it was just one of those things where like that was not a segment of the population that I was necessarily expecting to respond to it so strongly.
yeah.
Luckily, it was positive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think it's just interesting because like when it comes to like the conversation about fashion and getting dressed, like on the surface, it is like a really superficial thing. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it's just like it seems like it's like that by design because like it's like if fashion is superficial and women are interested in fashion, then what we are interested in and what impacts us like doesn't matter. And so, and it kind of is like this kind of disempowering idea when in fact, fashion is like an integral part of what makes us human. And so, it's been, the only way that we were ever able to like leave Africa was because we have clothes. We used to spend as much time, getting food on clothes, washing, making, growing, all of that kind of stuff. And that it is such an integral part. And yet, I don't know, what are your thoughts on why is it made out to be so superficial and like not really consequential.
I think it's still, along with beauty, coded as a feminine pursuit, even though I think there are more and more men who are interested in fashion now. And obviously, there are a lot of women who aren't interested in it. But it's fascinating to me, like, again, having worked at fashion publications basically my whole career and never having had to really argue for the idea that this was important to cover. I mean, when I worked at New York Magazine, I worked at the women's vertical that focused a lot on style. So sometimes I was justifying it a little bit to like the bigger pond, but again, it was something that most people accepted as like, oh yeah, we're going to have people covering fashion, we're going to have people covering sports, politics, and whatnot. But taking this out into the wider world and pitching it as a book made me realize, oh, this is still something that really exists, and there's like still a little bit of a stigma around taking it seriously. And there wasn't, there are books about like how to get dressed, and there are books that are like a biography of this designer, but there's not really something that like what I was trying to do that is recent. I mean, I was thinking of older books like The Fashionable Mind by Kennedy Fraser, but there wasn't really something current that was specifically about fashion that I could use as a comp title, meaning like what you compare. Oh,
Mhm.
it's this meets this. Like I didn't really have things in fashion for that. I used other titles, but people would say, "Oh, well, this is too niche. We don't see the audience. We don't know who the audience is." And I was kind of like, how many books about sports do you publish a year? And not only that, but like we all kind of see sports as this analog for like the hero's journey and, all of these bigger questions in life and all of this stuff, which that's fine. I'm not a big sports person. I like tennis, but I totally respect anyone that that's their interest and that's how they want to spend their time and that's what they want to support. But I just don't understand why we don't see any a similar, you know, like designers who are really talented. Why aren't they valued in the same way as athletes who are really talented at something? Um, and you kind of only get that respect when it's like in a museum or it's presented as art because other than the sort of like my kid could paint that type of reaction, people do have like people are worried about criticizing art and the art world. So if a dress is on a mannequin and it's in the Costume Institute and it has some wall text about how it's actually art, people can kind of wrap their heads around that. But I wanted to talk more about like what people wear every day, things that are not couture, things that are not necessarily pieces of fashion history, and how those communicate, like uniforms, lab coats, hospital gowns, and, you know, t-shirts and jeans, and all of those things. And that was kind of a tougher sell. And I got some feedback like, well, what if it was more about like female politicians and what they wear, which I do have a chapter on that, and I obviously do cover that, but I didn't want it to be just about that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there is still this, I mean, I don't know. It's weird to encounter because like I said, I'm not used to encountering it in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And so feeling like I had to justify it to people was challenging sometimes.
I'm really curious about the person who got it. Like, what was that moment like when you got the email back or like the phone call or whatever it was? And then they were like, yeah. Like, what did they say?
So it was my editor, Mary, who was the perfect person for the book and completely got it. And then it was like, oh, everything just falls into place because, like, you understand what I was trying to do, and I don't even have to explain it to you. And she was a big, like, evangelist for this book. And she also worked with me a lot to make it better and, pushed me to include things or take things out. I think there is, this saying that, like, nonfiction books aren't edited these days. I don't know if that's true, but that definitely wasn't my experience. But yeah, she was someone who I came in with my, prepared, ready to go, explain to her why this is important. And I didn't need to do any of that. And the references and stuff that were in the proposal or in the sample chapter, she totally got. So I was very lucky to, work with a team that was very supportive of it, totally understood what I was trying to do and like found my people. But it was not an instant path to that. And now I hear from people, and I don't know if anyone is using my book as a comp, but I definitely hear from people who are like, oh, I'm, writing a book and I was inspired by this aspect of what you're doing. So it's like, okay, just because I couldn't say it's this meets this, now people are using it in there, it's this meets this, which
Mhm.
is, feels very flattering.
Yeah.
Um, and then it is going to be coming out in China later in the spring, which is another thing where I didn't necessarily write about it, write it for an audience outside. I thought, the US, UK, Canada, maybe Australia. Those are the places that it was primarily sold. But it got a pretty big response randomly in Czech Republic. And I was doing some Czech interviews and also in Denmark. So it's interesting to see like where it like catches people's eye. But I'm excited about the Chinese edition because I've been, again, the Chinese editor who I've been talking to is similarly like, she was like, I read this and I thought this, we wanted this for our audience, and so many young women in China are going to be able to relate to this. And she's been kind of explaining to me about the factors, things that are going on there, and particularly with regard to young women and their experiences and the way that they're negotiating fashion. So again, it's the kind of thing where I was like, I don't think that this is niche, and indeed, it
Mhm.
doesn't seem like it was. I think there is an appetite for it. I think the one like misconception I've gotten is people will tag you in reviews, including negative reviews, and I don't really read like reviews
Mhm.
because but if you're tagged in it, it's pretty hard to not see it. I don't seek them out, I guess I should say. And some people have been like, oh, I thought this was going to be like Devil Wears Prada and like spilling all the tea, which I'm kind of like, I don't know where you would get that impression, but also like, I don't really have anything that interesting to share with you. Like, I'm lucky to have a relatively normal experience. But so I think there was like, maybe just because there have been so many like industry insider type books like that, or novels that were sort of ripped from the headlines. Yeah, so that's the main kind of off the wall response that I've gotten.
So, okay, so like this, I'm sorry, I'm going off road. Sorry, Kristen, I'm going like off road because I have like so many questions, and
Yeah.
this is like something that I'm really curious about. It's like your book is like a lot about like the context of which fashion exists in. And like there's this whole conversation about fashion is boring. Like people who,
Hmm.
just this whole, it's like very meta, doesn't really have any life, it doesn't have any thing. And like the people who have the best style have a style that reflects like the life that they're living. And so I'm wondering like where do you get your ideas that like this meets that in your writing
You mean like in terms of my writing about personal style or
or fashion in general? Because like if we look at these chapters about like millennial pink and like the market of what was happening in the zeitgeist, that was not necessarily about fashion. It was more about like and like the whole thing about like the male gaze and the female gaze, and that was like more a conversation about like marketing that kind of triggered that whole idea. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I've always been pretty interested in like culture more generally, and I'm lucky in my job that I get to, I love writing about music, so I get to cover music and some, celebrity actor profiles and things like that. I've profiled authors. But I am always looking at things that are not necessarily interwoven with fashion as closely as, because I don't like to have the blinders on of like, well, this is what we saw on the runway and these were the trends. And I think people can sometimes be in lockstep about it. And also, a lot of times, the things that are interesting aren't necessarily coming from the runway entirely. So, like, Millennial Pink was not something that really had a big runway expression. Maybe Acne was doing it at the time with their packaging, but it was really, like you said, more of a marketing thing, and it extended into food and interior design and graphic design and all of that. And it was, kind of this overarching thing. I think sometimes stuff like that really happens with fashion, like probably the biggest way I can think of that we've seen it recently is this whole conversation about quiet luxury and stealth wealth or old money dressing, like whatever you want to call it, which I've written about and find so fascinating. But I think you see it in all these different, visual media, this idea of like going so like retro with things and this obsession with a sort of old world nostalgic idea that's very muddled in terms of, it's this idea of like, oh, you should dress like a coastal grandmother, which is a thing that's a pretty privileged thing to be
Hmm.
on several levels. And young people wanting to aspire to these things that maybe people who are middle-aged now saw as being kind of uncool. Like, did people really want to dress like a coastal grandmother or like old money? People were rebelling against that. And
Hmm.
now seeing this fascination with it, and I think you're also seeing it in like interior decorating with the whole grand millennial trend. So yeah, I do like to sort of look outside just what's going on in fashion and just what's going on the runway and kind of look at like bigger picture things. Also, like all of this 80s nostalgia we're seeing now is really interesting. This like the big fur coats and the banker outfits and the sort of like I'm fascinated by how all of those 80s archetypes are coming back at this time of like a lot of economic uncertainty. So I do try to see not just like what's going on, but maybe the bigger thing that's going on around it for sure.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, so what are you seeing what's happening now? Because right now there's a lot of things going on, and I hear like, the whole thing with the trad wife and like this kind of return to like hyper feminine, not feminism, but hyper feminine looks. And then on the other hand, like I find myself wearing a lot of like menswear and like camouflage and like army green. I'm in like in fact I just got an email to like interview about like unisex dressing and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
so there's this kind of like divide that's happening in a lot of ways. And like what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think the trad wife thing is interesting and it kind of ties into the Millennial Pink chapter of the book because I was sort of talking about, I mean, I don't think the term trad wives was really in circulation when I was writing it, but this idea of people going back to the sort of like pioneer dresses and the fact that you were seeing like cool people in Brooklyn dressing like that, but also people who would identify as trad wives dressing like that, and this sort of weird merging of the culture. And now we're seeing people go back to these a lot in a lot of cases these more conservative ideals with fashion, like the really, like you said, hyper feminine, the sort of rustic trad wife. And then we're seeing people pushing back against those as well with more like gender fluid, non-binary clothes. But in general, it's just been interesting. Like right now, I'm working on thinking through like a digital column about what we saw female designers doing uh, in during Fashion Month, like Sarah Burton taking over Givenchy. I thought was so interesting because she was taking this really unexpected approach to this idea of feminine dressing, and she actually made it feel really cool and modern. And then you have Miuccia Prada, who at both Prada and Miu Miu said openly, my collections are inspired by femininity and questioning it. So she had this kind of more almost intentionally awkward take on it with this sort of slightly off-kilter like bullet bras and house dresses and this sort of retro take on it. I think because these like hyper traditional expressions of femininity have become so mainstream among a lot of people, I think designers are sort of looking at that and questioning it a little bit or having fun with it, as opposed to just wholesale churning out the same stuff, which is interesting. And, there's this idea of like, even people who I think would call themselves progressive, like sometimes fall into this idea of like a longing for a better time, or oh maybe it would be easier, like I've heard people be like, oh maybe it would be easier if I just like quit my job and didn't have to work and was a trad wife, even though the people who are like the trad wife influencers are very much working really hard. They are, creating a lot of content. They are basically running their own business based around this. But I do think there's like this fantasy that appeals to a lot of people of just surrendering to this stuff. And you're seeing that in fashion for sure.
Mm. Yeah.
So you're an insider as a fashion insider who, works at a very prestigious fashion magazine. I'm super curious about your own personal style. How do you approach it, getting dressed every day for work?
So I have had like so many terrible eras of fashion. Like I remember being in like maybe it was in middle school and coming into school and saying it to everyone. I went into New York City this weekend and I discovered a new designer. And that new designer was Juicy Couture. And people
Wow.
were like, people were genuinely befuddled about like what the hell I was wearing because it actually hadn't broken through. Like as much as it sounds weird to call it a new designer, it sort of was new to people. And then there were like a couple years and then everyone's doing it. But so I was very into that. I was also very into bedazzling everything. So that was bad. I
That's
distinctly
awesome.
remember going to visit Congress, and I cannot explain like why I wore what I wore, but I was definitely wearing like probably like flared jeans. I definitely had blue aviator sunglasses that were bedazzled.
Oh my
I had
What?
all of this
God,
stuff,
that's
and I'm
awesome.
meeting, John Kerry.
That's
I'm sure
amazing.
you were memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But so I went, went through all of these kind of phases. And I think when I started working at Elle, I was still very much in the grip of like the model off-duty look. So I was sort of trying to do that. I mean, just looking back at all this stuff, I think because and I write about this in the book, but like growing up, I didn't want to I felt like I can't really wear the Abercrombie and, polo and all those things that, were expensive and that other people could afford. So I thought I'll do thrift shopping and I'll get things secondhand or I'll cut things up and do crazy things with them. But it's almost like I developed that style in opposition to what other people were doing as opposed to like what my real instincts were.
Mhm.
So I think I had a lot of very like look at me type things going on, and there's unfortunately a visual record of a lot of them. And I'm still to a degree like I get really bored with the idea of a uniform. I know a lot of people find it convenient to have a uniform, and I wish I were one of them, but I like sort of playing around and coming up with new combinations of things and trying different things. But I do in general have like as you can probably tell, like more of a 70s thing going on. Like that's always been kind of the decade that I've been drawn to and feel like I visually fit into. And I sort of like that 70s, you know, like Anita Pallenberg, Stevie Nicks type of thing. But I mean, the one thing I will say is you meet a lot of people in fashion who either have like they truly have a uniform, and in some cases they have this really fabulous uniform. Like Carlene Surf is always wearing a juicy tracksuit and Uggs, and she looks amazing, and she wears like tons of jewelry. They find something that works for them and they kind of stick with it, and people have signatures. Or they go in completely the opposite direction, and it's like every trend that you could imagine they're doing. And it's always funny to like talk to people who are like, "Oh, I don't care about trends. I don't care," but then like they have the pedal pushers and the mesh flats and the this and the that. And so they like do really get into it. But I feel like I'm kind of in the middle because I'm still wearing a lot of stuff that I've always worn and I rewear things and I get a lot of things, still get a lot of things secondhand. But the idea of like, I'm just going to wear the same thing every day, or I'm just going to come up with a formula, I'm not really that into. Like the whole idea of you can sum up your personal style in, 3 words or whatever. I mean, no shade to the person who came up with that, but that's just not really how I see things. Like I might wake up one day and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go full Marie Antoinette and do something. And luckily, I have a lot of leeway in my job that I can do that, and people will not only not think it's weird, they'll be like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But yeah, I definitely have like had periods of going through completely different styles that kind of made no sense for me.
I think a lot of people be relieved to hear that
Yeah,
because, you know, being a top editor at a top fashion magazine, you know, and knowing that you're not born knowing this stuff.
mhm.
I think it's
Yeah. And I'm not a stylist. I'm not, like I work with people who are brilliant stylists, or they're amazing market editors who know where to get everything, or they're people who just put themselves together so well. And that's kind of not my thing. I'm really like a word person. I'm good at translating stuff into words, and I'm good at like synthesizing what I'm seeing around me, but I'm not someone who's ever going to be like skilled at even like giving people like tips on their personal style. It's sort of like, do whatever you want.
Mhm. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love that. I love that advice. I think that that's just, I think it's really good when people have like permission to explore and to play and to even like be cringe like a little bit, like don't be
Yeah.
afraid, it's like this whole idea of like trying to capture that like timeless style so you're never cringe. It just is like leading to a lot of people just being afraid to express themselves.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And it sounds like you're really playing and experimenting and really having fun. And I think that that's like the kind of like the most authentic you can actually be. You're just being in the moment.
Yeah, and people love this idea of like, these are investment pieces, these are timeless, they don't date. Like you just need to get this capsule wardrobe. There's a lot of that. And I understand that because I feel like people have this fear of, like you said, looking cringe, or they just want to fit in. But I think, everything is going to date. If someone looked at a picture of, I mean, definitely me from 2005, but pretty much anyone from 2005, they're not going to think this could have been taken yesterday. This person
Mhm.
is so timeless. So we have to sort of embrace that things are going to change, things are going to date, our outlook is going to date. And again, like I don't believe in getting a new clothing haul every time you want to, but like through buying things secondhand, through swapping with people, all of those things, you can do that in a way that's not bad for the planet as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I
Yeah,
was so
so
thrilled to get your email.
oh yay. Yeah, so tell our listeners where can they find you and yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you have a
Yeah.
hard copy because I
Yeah,
read
you have a
mine. I listened to mine
visual
actually.
aid.
Yeah.
So I'm at Veronique Hyland, just my full name on Instagram, and Veroniquian on Twitter. That was supposed to be an adjective based on my name, but I don't think it really worked. I also used to have a terrible Instagram name, and then I just went to my full name to make things easier. And I write a column on Elle.com called Style Points, which is I started as a way to promote the book, but has a lot of overlap with the things that I talk about in the book, and it's a way for me to be more reactive to things. And then I do longer form articles for Elle print as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's kind of it.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I can't wait to get back into like reading that column. So yeah, so cool. Well, thank you so much again. And it's
Yeah.
been such a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me. And I'm so excited for, you said you're going to have like scientists and people on, so I'm excited to see all the different people who are weighing in, because I feel like it's interesting for me to hear about fashion from people who are not necessarily in the fashion world too.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
it
for
is
sure.
exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so cool. Well, awesome.